and can even lead to fan bases scratching their heads decades later wondering what could have been. Whether that's Joe Thornton being traded in his MVP season by the Boston Bruins, or Patrick Waugh being traded by the Montreal Canadiens for practically nothing just to go on and win another Stanley Cup. This has been happening in the league for decades now. So today what I want to do is look through 7 of the worst trades that I can remember in the past decade and talk about whether or not I think that these players would be better off in their current situations or back on the team that traded them in the first place. Now, these are all just a few trades that I can remember, I want to say, over the past 10 years or so. So if there's a couple like the ones I mentioned in the intro, be sure to comment them below, and maybe I'll make a second video talking about some older ones that happened a while back. Or if you just have some more from the past decade, make sure you leave those in the comments as well. Before we get into this one though, make sure you like this video and subscribe to the channel. It helps me reach more people who love this sport and get my videos out there to create better content for you guys. But with all that being said, let's get right into this one. The first trade on my list was way back when the Blackhawks traded Artemi Panarin. At that time, the Blackhawks decided to move Panarin, Tyler Mott, and a 6th-round pick in 2017 to the Columbus Blue Jackets for Brandon Saad, Anton Forsberg, and a 5th-round pick in 2018. Now, looking back at this, I think we all can say that the Columbus Blue Jackets won this trade, but at the time, the reason the Blackhawks moved on from Panarin was basically because of money. The Blackhawks were already paying Patrick Kane and Jonathan Toews $10.5 million. And I think at that point, they just didn't feel like the organization had enough to compete for a Stanley Cup to justify them paying Panarin. Now, if you think about this, this might have been the biggest blunder the Blackhawks have had in recent memory, and there are a ton of bad trades from this organization. Whether it's the Teuvo Teravainen one, the Alex DeBrincat one, or just this Panarin one in general, the Blackhawks were finding talent everywhere, but just didn't want to sign them to new extensions. Now, the problem with this trade is that Panarin has gone on to become a 100-point scorer in the NHL and a potential MVP in multiple seasons, making this look terrible for the Blackhawks because they could have used Panarin over the years, which is why they're kind of in the position they are today, having to go to the lottery draft to get players like Connor Bedard. Had Panarin stayed with the Blackhawks with that DeBrincat, Teravainen, Kane, and Toews lineup, I feel like the Blackhawks could have been much more competitive than they had been over the years, and I know that it would have been tough to pay them all this money, but given how everything panned out, I think the Blackhawks probably should have just traded away one of their other players making a big contract to try to make room for Panarin. He may have never became the player that he is today, but it still would have been nice to see him in a Blackhawks uniform playing alongside Kane and Toews for a bit longer. This next one may go down as one of the worst trades in NHL history, and it's between the Florida Panthers and the Calgary Flames. And if you've been paying attention to hockey recently, you know exactly where I'm going with this one. About 3 years ago, the Calgary Flames and Florida Panthers made a trade sending Matthew Tkachuk to the Panthers in exchange for Jonathan Huberdeau and Mackenzie Weegar. And at the time when this trade was made, Jonathan Huberdeau was over a 100-point player as well, making it feel like the Flames actually won out in this trade, considering the fact that they got a defenseman along with Huberdeau. Now, Matthew Tkachuk is much younger than Huberdeau at this point, and the upside for him was clearly higher. But with the Flames being backed into a corner, they had to move him for something, and at the time, this felt like a very good package, all things considered. But hindsight is 2020 when it comes to this trade, and given the way that both of these players have played since the trade, it's very evident that the Florida Panthers won in this one. Matthew Tkachuk went on to have another 100-point season and followed it up with a 90-point season, taking his team to the Stanley Cup Finals 2 years in a row. Meanwhile, the Calgary Flames, they have Jonathan Huberdeau playing some of the worst hockey of his career, being benched at times, and really becoming just a 50-point scorer since entering the Flames organization. At this point, I think we all know that the Florida Panthers won this one, but imagine what could have been if Johnny Gaudreau and Matthew Tkachuk stayed in Calgary. I feel like that team easily could have won a cup with those two had they just stuck with it, but unfortunately, we'll never know, and for Matthew Tkachuk and the Florida Panthers, they easily won this trade. This next one is with an organization that has had a few blunders over the year, and that's the Ottawa Senators. We're actually going to take you all the way back to 2016 with this one. On July 18th, 2016, the Ottawa Senators traded Mika Zibanejad and a 2018 second-round pick to the New York Rangers for Derek Brassard and a 2018 seventh-round pick. Now, hindsight is 2020 with this one. Mika Zibanejad was never supposed to be this talented of a player, but for the Ottawa Senators, I feel like they're constantly moving on from young talent before they can even develop develop into any sort of player with that organization. And Mika Zibanejad is the perfect example of this. At his best, he was maybe a 40 to 30 point scorer with the Senators, but once he was traded to the Rangers, he blossomed into this amazing top line center that can achieve around 90 points in a season at his best. Mika Zibanejad is a dynamic two-way forward and is brilliant on the power play. And for the Ottawa Senators, still remaining at the bottom of the league, this one's gotta hurt. And yes, they were able to acquire new talent like Brady Tkachuk and Tim Stützle later down the line, but with Mika Zibanejad and those cup runs that the Ottawa Senators were making back then, I feel like he could have been a great addition to those teams and still would have been a beautiful part of this Senators future had they kept him. This one definitely was a win for the New York Rangers. They now have a top line center, and really the Ottawa Senators have nothing to show for that trade. Like I said, the Ottawa Senators have had a few blunders throughout their organization's history, but this next one is another recent one that just makes you scratch your head as a fan of that team. And it's when they traded Mark Stone for Brandstrom and a second. And even today, the fact that the Ottawa Senators didn't get a first-round pick for Stone blows my mind. Now, Brandstrom just had his best season, getting 20 points in 76 games played, which isn't anything to write home about, while Mark Stone has gone on to become the captain of the Vegas Golden Knights and win a Stanley Cup, being around a point per game player when he's healthy. Now, I know people will probably say that this one didn't age too poorly because Mark Stone is constantly on the injury report, but I would take Mark Stone on my team any day of the week over what the Senators got back in return. These are two players in Mika Zibanejad and Mark Stone who have gone on to become top-line players for their teams, while the Ottawa Senators literally have nothing to show for either of these trades, making you wonder why their GM was ever there in the first place, because these are two big, massive mistakes for the Senators to have made and basically changed the route of their future for years afterwards. This next one goes under the radar way too often, and I'm not too sure why, and this one's between the St. Louis Blues and New York Rangers. The Blues acquired Pavel Buchnevich from the Rangers for forward Sammy Blais along with a 2022 second-round pick. And I think it's safe to say that the St. Louis Blues got away with robbery here because Buchnevich is clearly the best player in this trade, and the Rangers really have nothing to show for it. Looking at Buchnevich's numbers while he was with the Rangers, his best season was his last with 48 points, and since joining the Blues, he's been over a 65-point player. So he's definitely taken a jump and has become one of their better stars on the team. It's not like he's a franchise-altering guy, but I think any team would be lucky to have a forward of his caliber on their roster. And for the Rangers, when you get basically nothing in return, considering you could have probably used a guy like him on one of your top-line wings, it just makes you scratch your head as a fan, because what were they thinking with this one? If you couldn't afford him, at least get something great in return. But unfortunately for the Rangers, they get nothing in this one, and Buchnevich has become a true star over in St. Louis and has really developed into one of the better wingers in the league. This next one kind of goes underrated because I feel like a lot of people assume that Forsberg was drafted by the Predators, but actually he was drafted by a different team, and this trade may have become one of the worst ones in Capitals history. The Washington Capitals decided to trade away Philip Forsberg at a very young age for Martin Arat and Michael Latta. These two players made small contributions for the Capitals as they went through one of the better times of their organization, but looking back on this trade today with Philip Forsberg becoming almost a 50-goal scorer with the Nashville Predators, this one definitely has to hurt for the Washington Capitals, who are basically about to explode into a rebuild and are going out acquiring players like Pierre-Luc Dubois, when instead they could have an amazing player like Philip Forsberg entering this new era of Capitals hockey. Now, who knows if they ever would have been able to afford Forsberg or if he ever would have become this caliber of a player, but as a big fan of Philip, I feel like this was one of the worst trades of the past decade, and not enough people know about it because Forsberg has been such an icon over with the Nashville Predators that it feels like he was drafted over there and has played there his whole career. But this one is a mistake by the Washington Capitals, and they deserve to be ridiculed for this one because neither Arat or Latta are playing with the organization, and Philip Forsberg is thriving with the Nashville Predators. The last trade on my list is easily one of the worst ones in the past decade, and people need to talk about it more, and that's when JT Miller was traded to the Vancouver Canucks by the Tampa Bay Lightning for a goalie that doesn't play in the league anymore, a third-round pick, and a conditional first-round pick in the 2020 NHL Draft. Now, if you take a look at all of the success that the Lightning have had over the past few years, I feel like, yes, it was the right move to move on from JT because you needed to pay for other players to get you those 2 cups, but imagine if they had kept JT Miller at this point. The Lightning would now have both Braden Point and JT Miller as their 2 top-line centers, considering the fact that they're probably going to move on from Steven Stamkos. Now, with JT Miller being a 100-point scorer this year, his contract is incredibly friendly, and for what the Lightning got back for him, it's kind of embarrassing if you look back on that trade. It's easy to say that now with hindsight. I mean, at the time, I don't remember so many people being up in arms about this trade, but the Vancouver Canucks got away with a fleecing here, and the Tampa Bay Lightning got to be scratching their heads wondering what could have been had they kept the star center, given the fact that, like I said, they're moving on from Steven Stamkos most likely. But let me know what you guys think. These are 7 trades that I feel like these teams either fleeced or just got robbed on. I want to know some other ones though. I want to make some more parts to this because I really liked researching for this video. So comment some of the worst trades that you can remember over the past 20 years or so. Make sure you like this video and subscribe to the channel for more content like this.